to the CNI Digital Scholarship Planning webinar series. And if you've participated in previous sessions, welcome back. I know many of you are working from home and some of you are back on campus. I hope you're all doing well during this difficult time of the pandemic. I'm Joan Lippincott, Associate Executive Director Emerita of CNI, and I'm moderating the 9 sessions of this series. Each of you is registered for all sessions, and if you've missed some or would like to rewatch or share the presentations, we have recordings available already for the first 6 sessions, as well as a set of questions to guide planning discussions on your own campus. And the resources for the remainder of the sessions will be available soon. We have 2 speakers for this session and we'll take questions after each. Please type your questions in the chat box at any time. In addition, after the formal 1-hour session is over, we'll open the mics in case some of you wish to verbally ask questions of the speakers. The chat box is also available to communicate with each other or with me or our technical lead, Beth Sechrist. During the presentations, all participants will be muted. For this 7th session, our presenters will discuss a wide range of issues and programs related to diversity, equity, and inclusion as it applies to digital scholarship. I'm pleased to welcome our presenters today, Janice Welburn, Dean of Marquette University Libraries, and Sarah Dupont from University of British Columbia, where she is head librarian of the Huihua Library, the only Indigenous branch library at a post-secondary institution in Canada. Their bios are on the webinar site, and I won't take any more time with introductions in order to give our speakers more time. So over to you, Janice.
Thank you, Joan. I want to begin by thanking CNI for the opportunity to talk to all of you today about how diversity matters in our digital world. You know, I was pleased and excited to learn that there's such a strong interest in the subject. There is a growing community of experts on this subject, but I am giving my presentation from the perspective of a dean tasked with bringing people together and finding resources to advance our digital initiatives. So, if you watched this year's Emmy Award, you might have seen renowned director and producer Tyler Perry receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. In his acceptance speech, Perry talked about his grandmother's patchwork quilt and how in his travels he dishonored her gift to him. I want to tell him I too dishonored my grandmother by ditching the quilt that she made for me, and I wish I could get it back. In later years, he came to realize the beauty of the quilt, one just like this, one from the famous African-American gilders at Gee's Bend. The evidence and knowledge across diverse cultures and communities is transmitted from one generation to the next across multiple formats. Capturing those experiences requires an exploration of worlds beyond print. A quilt made for practical use can also tell important stories. I argue that new generations of students and perhaps faculty want to make use of digital tools for multiple reasons, including documenting the stories of their elders, families, and communities, research, and capturing the further disseminating social movement activism that exists in our current environment, especially in our moments of unrest and distress. Diversity is a function of dissimilarities, whether we're talking about language, race, gender, and other socially constructed identities, ability, or geographic location. It can also reside at the intersections of identities, where power and privilege have deep effects on one's daily life at work, home, school, and so forth. A little about Marquette. Marquette was founded in 1881 and is a Jesuit medium-sized R2 university located in the heart of Milwaukee. We have a student body population of around 11,500 that includes undergraduates and graduate students. Now, the status of our digital programs at Marquette can be divided in three areas. How we work with people in our communities to create original digital work. Second, how our ongoing commitment to digitizing historical collections. And three, assembling the digital artifacts of social movements to create stories. As previously stated, our library is primarily concerned with two things: the work we are doing to help create original digital work with students and faculty, and the ongoing digitization of printed materials that contribute to our understanding of history and culture. We do this against a reality that we can't figure out, that we haven't figured out, I should say. We are faced with the fact that in our society, numerous digital artifacts are appearing across the web, and there are no better examples than those that have been generated in 2020, capturing what we did during the coronavirus pandemic, how we marched against racial injustice and social inequality, fires raging our forests, and the battle for the soul of science. In 2016, we redirected resources in the Rainer Memorial Library to form the Digital Scholarship Lab. We planned and opened the lab to coincide with a series of digital scholarship symposiums we co-hosted with a group of our faculty. A lot of interest was generated in doing digital projects, and our lab was designed to serve anybody, any faculty, any student who had a vision for some kind of project, whether a visual project, a podcast, or a classroom presentation. The Digital Scholarship Lab, again, was established to better support faculty, student, and staff interested in creating digital projects. The lab serves the campus as part media studio, part maker space, and part digital research center. It now supports data visualization with tools like Tableau and digital methodologies such as text mining and topic modeling. The open expansive space includes a classroom with mobile walls, a touch panel display, 3D printers, augmented reality, and virtual and VR headsets. Faculty, mainly in the humanities and social sciences, routinely bring their classes to the DS Lab for orientation, project planning workshops, and software demonstrations. Our students largely use the space for collaborative group work and study. I now want to shift a little to talk about a few of the projects that the DS Lab has engaged in. In 2017, the Digital Scholarship Lab collaborated with a faculty member who has since left the university, Dr. Beth Godby's Writing for Social Justice, a community-based learning class. And they had two partners. One was the Black Holocaust Museum located in Milwaukee, and the YWCA of Southwest Wisconsin's Racial Justice Program. For the Y, students created educational and promotional materials. They produced a wide range of advertising, event planning, and promotional materials, including videos, banners, posters, for a public stand against racism campaign. The campaign theme that year was Women of Color Leading Change. The campaign was designed to build community among those who work for racial justice and raise awareness about the negative impact of institutional and structural racism in our communities. The campaign was one of their national strategies for the WISE national strategy for fulfilling their mission of eliminating racism. And it was a project that I think all of us benefited from and was very exciting, and our students learned a lot from engaging and working with that project. Next, the Near West Side Digital Archive seeks to tell a story of a neighborhood through the histories of its institutions, schools, and organizations. Documents and images explore the relationship of those institutions, the neighborhood, special attention, and the neighborhood, and special attention has been given to the ways in which demographic and political changes along with economic transformation affected those relationships. Documents and images are contextualized and not intended to provide a comprehensive history of the neighborhood. Rather, they suggest some of the tensions and collaborations, as well as the accomplishments and challenges that have characterized the relationships between residents of the Near West Side and Marquette University, which is located in the Near West Side community. This is a long-term project funded by Marquette's Center for Urban Research, Teaching, and Outreach, and organized in collaboration with the libraries, archives, and the Digital Scholarship Lab. Another one, Protests at MU, Dissent on the Marquette's Campus. For this student-led project, the Digital Scholarship Lab staff worked with student interns from the history department. The ideal of this project was inspired by 200 Nights of Freedom, a program which commemorated the 50th anniversary of the March on Milwaukee. The interactive digital media project draws from the pages of the Marquette Tribune, our student newspaper, the university archives, and oral histories of community members who participated in the march. Protest at MU offers glimpses of some of the events during campus protests about civil rights, racial justice, and the Vietnam War. Through combining archival research and modern digital media tools, the creators have created and present ways in which students, faculty, and administrators at Marquette interacted with issues of racial inequality and military intervention raised during what can be viewed as one of the most periods in American history. Next, the Arab and Muslim Women's Research and Resource Institute is a community archives created with Omega. The archives documents the cultural construction of disability among immigrant Muslim populations of Greater Milwaukee and Chicago, and the social implications of these constructions for first and second generation immigrant Muslim girls and women. The Digital Scholarship Lab continues to work with an interdisciplinary team of Marquette faculty and the Arab and Muslim Women Research and Resource Institute as community partners who are collecting and analyzing data. The oral histories generated by the project are archived and openly accessible in the digital archive. Okay. Now I want to turn to some examples from our digitized collections that are used by students and scholars who are exploring diverse communities. These slides highlight collections that are part of our special collections and archives. Faculty and students in disciplines that range from history, theology, communications, and literature are beginning to use and integrate these collections into their digital projects. I've chosen these slides to draw attention to our collection focused on Indigenous people. They include Catholic mission records, Native American school records, Black and Indian mission records, and tribal photographs. Researchers on and off campus can access these materials that support and enhance research, teaching, and the exploration of Indigenous cultures that have been developed into digital projects. Up to this point, I've talked about projects that are familiar to us as libraries and librarians. But we are now living in a world where smartphones now enable people to document events in our society and disseminate through social media. In our students' mind, the yearbook has now been replaced by their own digital collection, and a lot has been generated. And I would say the same is true for us. How many of us at conferences pull out our smartphone to show photos of our families, or we use it to capture slides when we're at a conference as opposed to taking notes? I do. Social media has the primary purpose of transmitting information anywhere. In 2020, this has meant everything from musicians performing in their living rooms to amateur videographers recording the spread of social movements. Many people are saying that we are in a defining moment in our history. Media are watching all of this very closely, be it deaths at the hand of police officers, rallies and marches through neighborhoods. All are being observed through the lenses of smartphones and uploaded to our alternate media. So we have to actually worry about something that the late collection development scholar Ross Atkinson warned us about 30 years ago, that it is the anti-collection, that is the materials out there that may be insignificant or very important. At Marquette, we want to ensure that some of these information artifacts have a place in digital collections that we create. So, as I try to bring my presentation to a close, I urge you to think about how to make sure that diversity matters as we develop strategies in our digital world. I encourage you to think about 4 issues. The first, how we can engage students in the creation of digital content. Second, how can we improve the work that faculty do in advancing digital scholarship? Third, how can we make sure that in digitization projects that we practice inclusion? And to me, that's one of our biggest challenges. And finally, how do we keep an eye on social media? So that concludes my presentation. Again, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedules to listen to what a dean in a medium-sized institution has to offer on the topic. And again, thank you, Joan, for the invitation.
Janice, that was really excellent. The variety of things that you showed us is so impressive. And the first question from one of our participants is actually just a question that I wanted to ask you. Can you please speak to how these projects are generated and maintained, whether by the library, the faculty, or some of the neighborhood or other community associations that you've worked with, or does it vary by project?
Most of them we have maintained in our library, and certainly what we do in the digital scholarship lab, we encourage people that we want to house some of that when possible in our digital repository, whether it's presentations or the nature of it, or in our digital archives. And most people have been very open to that. Some of that is shared with the community. It just varies. But our purpose is creating projects that will be available for researchers at our universities and beyond for decades to come, long after I'm gone. So it is a variety.
And for some things like the projects that classes are doing, who's involved in working with the faculty, the digital scholarship people, as well as your subject specialists or your instruction librarians? How, and do they go out and find the projects, or do faculty come to them, or again, is that a mix?
Okay. It's a combination, and I need to give credit to my star, Tara Bergeon, a Canadian, who is our Assistant Dean for Digital Scholarship and also head of Research and Instructional Services. So sometimes faculty come to us. We work with subject liaisons to make sure that they understand the purpose of the digital scholarship lab. They bring, when they're doing instruction, to bring those classes into the digital scholarship lab if the faculty member has not initiated it, and talk about how we can assist them in terms of what it is that they're trying to do. And also introducing them, make sure that they're aware of special collections as a resource. So it's a combined effort, but Tara is our star there, and she represents us on campus. We're currently working with data science project with Northwest Mutual. And so wherever things are, Tara is there, and she has her ear to the ground. I just need to find the resources. And right now we have 2 positions open, our coordinator for the lab and our coordinator for our institutional repository. Both came at the same time and unfortunately recently left us. So we're in the midst of just holding until we can, those positions are out there. So look for them, help us out, help Tara out. But I can't take credit for that. It's her, and it's the subject liaisons, it's the faculty. And all of this started with a conversation I had with the chair of the history department. I was leaving the library and he was coming in, and I asked, well, what are you up to? What's new in history? And we started, and we realized we had this joint interest in digital scholarship. And then we brought people to your first institute, Joan, to help us get started, and it's just grown. And it is a priority, and thanks to faculty who helped promote it and who really appreciate it.
Thank you. We have a comment and a question from one of our presenters in an earlier session. She says, this was so well organized and presented, Janet, with great examples. Thanks for providing clear ways for us to think about how we're ensuring diversity, equity, inclusion in our own work. And then asks a question, can you talk a bit more about how you select projects with diversity in mind? Are you being intentional about selecting according to criteria related to social justice?
Yes and no. I mean, my whole career, I focused on diversity in different ways in terms of being inclusive in terms of the staff that we hire. The collections that we build have always been an interest, and this is just another face of that. I think diversity and inclusion is certainly a goal at our university. It's in our goals. And I happen to live with the person who's responsible for helping Marquette achieve that goal. And so it's also it's a goal within our strategic plan. And so we look at that as, how can we help the university meet that goal beyond just ordering journals, trying to diversify our staff. And so we do that, and we look at, as we're recruiting newer faculty, we try to look at what that interest is. And we look at opportunities when we go into their classroom to talk about what we have. And we don't necessarily have a lot. One of the things that we don't have a lot that depicts the history of Black alumni. It was that photographers, they took photos for the yearbook, but any other events, we're not there. So we're working as we engage with ethnic alumni to help us tell your story. Think about residing, um, depositing photos or anything that you have there. We're making some headway there. So we try to do that. When I'm out at meetings and I'm meeting new faculty, Tara's out there, we want to know and we tell them about the capabilities. We try to promote the digital art, scholarship lab as a way that will support their research, their teaching. And it's all of that. So it has been on a number in a number of areas intentional, and some we looked upon. People came to us, and it just helped enhance what we did.
Thank you, Janice. We'll do one final question and then move on to Sarah's presentation. The question is, how do you go about finding adequate technical expertise or support for the variety of digital tools and platforms that faculty may want to use? Does the burden fall on the library, on the university IT unit or college IT unit, or the faculty themselves?
It's been us. We have trained our staff in our libraries to use those tools as we try to figure out what's there. There is a digital media studio in the College of Communication, and we do have what we call the hub that's situated in a separate building. And Tara and her staff, they work with them to coordinate training, to make people aware of tools. We talk to faculty, so it's been a combination, but mainly we have an instructional designer. We have a percentage of an IT staff that's devoted to work in the digital scholarship lab, and just an amazing staff member right now who actually has two masters, one in the humanities and I think one in education or history. And all of that comes together and hiring graduate students to help with the training.
Perfect. Janice, thank you again for a really wonderful presentation. I know you took time out of a schedule that included an important meeting today, and you took the time to be with us, and I truly appreciate it, and I know all of our participants do as well. So thank you, and you can end your screen share, and I'll invite Sarah Dupont, to bring up her slides.
Thank you. And I want to stick around. I'm glad I'm here because I want to hear Sarah. I'm very impressed with what she's doing. So again, thank you.
Thanks.
Janice, I've still got your screen shared.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Over to you, Sarah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Wow, what an inspiring act to follow. I'm really honored to be on this panel with Janice. Thank you so much for sharing about your work at the university. And I was particularly inspired by the quilt and the transmission from one generation to the next. That is something that we care very deeply about in Indigenous librarianship. So I have my slides up now, and I want to thank the audience for taking time out of their day as well. It's a world of webinars right now, and it's wonderful to be able to develop ourselves professionally and to learn what people are doing despite some of the challenges we have with traveling during this time. I'm going to stop my video because I'm slightly concerned about internet bandwidth issues, but I will turn my video back on for the Q&A. Great. So thank you again, Joan and Janice, for your preceding introduction and remarks. I'm really honored to have been invited by Joan and the Coalition for Networked Information to present on this panel theme on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Digital Scholarship Planning 2020 webinar series. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and my Twitter handle is @Dupont Sarah. It is protocol in Indigenous circles to recognize on whose territory you are situated. This protocol has, in the last decade, become much more commonplace in academia, government, and media in Canada. And as a Métis scholar, it's particularly important to me to take the time to do this well. I'm currently physically situated on Clélie-Tenay territory, which is about 900 kilometers or 500 miles northeast of Vancouver, British Columbia. This is a photo of the Fraser River in the heart of the city of Prince George, which occupies Clélie-Tenay's unceded lands. Where Prince George is not far from the headwaters of the Fraser River, Musqueam territory is on the river's delta arms in what is now commonly known as the cities of Vancouver, Richmond, and other lower mainland municipalities. You can see UBC lands on the unceded lands of the Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam people in this photo. If you follow your eyes to the edge and there's a point, that's where UBC campus is. When we do work at the university, we abide by the cultural protocols of the Musqueam, who have been generous in guiding our steps. The story of the Huihua Library begins in 1974 in a room in this building known as a Quonset hut. The hut was home to the Native Indian Teacher Education Program, which is still operating today under a different name. They've swapped out the I for Indian and replaced it with Indigenous. The collection in that little library supported the NITEP program, and it would later form the core of the first collection of Huihua. In the early 1990s, Cree scholar Dr. Verna Kirkness brought together prominent elders to advise on the building of the Longhouse and the library. These are photos of the workshop notes that give us a summary of the design objectives. One of these objectives is that the spaces should be welcoming for Indigenous peoples, and this remains one of the core values of the library and the Longhouse today. Everything from how librarians, staff, and students interact with the Longhouse community patrons to how we design our physical and digital spaces contributes to the sense of welcoming. In 1993, buildings were completed and the NITEP library moved to its current home alongside the UBC First Nations Longhouse. During its opening ceremony, the library was given the name Huihua, meaning echo, by Chief Kutlacha of the Squamish Nation. The architecture of this unique place represents the kekuli, or pit house, of the interior Salish peoples. This image shows the exposed logs that represent the roof and the smoke hole. Usually covered with earth, tree needles, and other foliage, the entrance to the kekuli was traditionally via a central beam with notches carved into it for a ladder. Not only is this special building the only Indigenous academic branch library in Canada, but it also serves as a window into the perspectives and values of the elders who worked tirelessly to make the vision of the library and the Longhouse a reality. It teaches us what can come of working together, of advocacy and cooperation, and I'm excited to share some of the things that I have learned while working in this building with the people who care deeply about its form and functions. As part of the First Nations House of Learning unit that serves the Longhouse and its community, Huihua integrates the teachings of the elders as part of our practice. For example, the Longhouse was built to serve as a home away from home for the First Nations students attending UBC. We eat with the staff and students and participate regularly in events at the Longhouse. And so along those lines, we are a work family. And I would like to briefly introduce you to the Huihua team. From top left to right, we have Carlene, Tamis, and Kayla, who happen to be the other Indigenous members of our team. The middle row starts with Eleanor, then goes to student librarians Rio and Bronte, and the bottom row is myself and our newest student, Maya. Working together in support of the library, Longhouse, campus, and community goals is what defines our approach to everything we do. Here was a picture in our orange shirts in support of Orange Shirt Day yesterday, which happens every September 30th in Canada as a tribute to all of those who attended and survived residential schools. I was asked to speak about some of the values and ethics of my work as head of the Huihua Library, but I would be remiss if I did not share the campus context in which we are able to realize them. These are some of the key points from the UBC strategic plan that are easy to see the role of libraries in. We work with Indigenous students. We have collection description practices that are fraught with colonial biases. We work with faculty to support courses and research. And we have work to do among all library employees to be able to say that we truly have a shared understanding of Indigenous peoples and histories. Recently, the Indigenous Strategic Plan was approved. It was created with input from more than 2,500 students, faculty, and staff across our campuses, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, as well as from Indigenous community partners. Then we have the library's strategic framework, which commits to incorporate Indigenous perspectives in all of its 5 strategic directions. All 3 of these strategic plans privilege indigenization and decolonization priorities. I recognize that not every institution is as fortunate as UBC to have this much support for Indigenous initiatives, but it took a long time and a lot of advocacy from those who came before. While there have been many missteps before, and there are continued frustrations for Indigenous peoples at UBC, the continued expansion in resources to support this work is very inspiring and hopeful. The diversity of my work as head of Huihua has also afforded me opportunities to think about the questions of decolonization and indigenization from the perspective of Huihua's position of interconnected, just making sure I'm still connected.
Yes.
Thank you. From the interconnected relationships and complex impacts in many areas of Indigenous information practices. When applied in the appropriate ways, indigenization and decolonization work can be factored into everything we do in libraries and archives. I will start with collections, as that is one of the core activities of Huihua, to build collections that are by, for, and about Indigenous peoples in Canada, with a particular emphasis on materials written by us. These collections support teaching, research, and personal and professional development. One of our most carefully curated collections is our films, through DVD videos and streaming media licenses. Pictured here is a news story from just this week of the First Nations mother of 7, Joyce Ichikon. She used video, posted on Facebook Live, to record the racist treatment and inaction that appears to have led to her death. She died on September 29th, just a few days ago. Joyce is another tragic reminder that there is so much work to be done before Indigenous peoples are safe from the legacies of racism that have perpetuated all professions, even the ones that are supposed to heal. We privilege Indigenous voices in our library so that patrons can see and hear our truths, so that they have a place to go to seek information related to the injustices that we hear about in the media. So how can libraries work against racism? It is truly a battle to fight, and we cannot afford to be complicit in the perpetuation in how our collections are described. At Huihua Library, we have been working on some of this over the years, but we have not yet been able to dedicate enough time to get us to a state where we can offer it to others. This is our goal in the next 4 years, to present a working thesaurus to other academic libraries that has been developed with other Indigenous librarians and subject matter experts and community consultations. I don't want you to leave here thinking that this work is easy to do, because it really isn't. It's mired with layers of identity politics, naming and claiming, language and cultural literacies, and fluencies that all need community and cultural validating. There are obvious terms that are, for example, the subject of the sports team renamings that need to be changed, but the less obvious ones may not come to mind. To give you some of these examples, I turn to the late Dr. Greg Younging's book called The Elements of Indigenous Style, where he discusses the problem of metadata messes. He offers us the following. When you see the word artifact, it could be replaced with the word belonging. Where band, clan, and tribe are located in metadata, use nation, people, or society. Where folklore, legends, myths, or tales are in metadata, we can consider oral traditions and traditional stories. And finally, where we see ritual in metadata, we can use ceremony. This is just a small example of the words that we can indigenize. The risk of not doing this work for metadata is not only that it is egregious to Indigenous students and scholars and community members using your collections, it can lead to inaccuracies in any new research being produced. Here is an example from our own UBC Library's open collections. The spelling of Tsleil-Waututh Nation is incorrect, and its representation in Hulkmeelum, as seen in the second bullet point, is not present in the metadata. I also want to share with you about how Huihua Library has indigenized its approach to organizing its collection through a classification system. I decided that the most succinct and interesting way to do this would be via a fabulous video developed by 2 UBC iSchool students, Bronwyn McKee and Jordan Zirk, for a class project. But you may only be able to hear the audio because I need to switch to a different screen. So bear with me while I do that.
Welcome to Huihua Library. Huihua Library's collections and services prioritize Indigenous approaches to teaching, learning, and research. It is important to understand call numbers and information organization at Huihua Library in order to locate research material.
Like other UBC libraries, Huihua uses call numbers assigned by a classification system to organize resources on the shelves. Other UBC libraries use call numbers based on the Library of Congress classification system. Huihua is different. It uses call numbers based on the Brian Deere classification system, or BDCS, developed by Ganawage librarian Brian Deere in the 1970s. This classification system assigns unique call numbers to items in the library's collection.
BDCS is a library classification system used to organize materials in libraries with specialized Indigenous collections to reflect a First Nations worldview. Subcategories demonstrate the relationships among First Nations by grouping them geographically as opposed to alphabetically, as is often seen in the Library of Congress classification.
Other Indigenous collecting centers are also looking to Huihua for support in indigenizing their classification systems. This project, with the Carrier-Sakani Tribal Council here in Prince George, recently received a lot of media attention. I am proud to say that Huihua is featured in the article, as we assisted archivist Catherine Leroux in this project. When thinking about indigenizing and decolonizing academic libraries, archives, and digital collections, we need to think critically about the privilege held by those working in institutions where there is, for example, reliable internet, more people to share the workload, and in the case of many First Nations, employees who have more than a high school education and who have chosen to work in remote locations. So I ask you to think about this not in theoretical terms, but in practical ones, where goals expressed by Indigenous peoples are genuinely listened to and actioned. That is the mechanism by which indigitization was started, through a community question about equipment for audio cassette digitization. Partners in the institution came together and, with input from 3 pilot projects done in First Nations communities, the program grew into several components. One of these is an online manual with digitization best practices and workflows, available on our new website at indigitization.ca. And another is portable digitization equipment, sourcing, and loaning. Next, we put together matching grant funds for startup projects, which was put forward by the Irving K. Barber Learning Center of the UBC Library. I am pleased to share with you that to date, 48 grant projects with 34 partners from across the province have digitized over 11,000 tapes and received over $422,000 in grant money. But none of this would have been possible without training that brings the manual and the equipment to life. Here is Jerry Lawson, the Indigitization Technical Lead and member of our steering committee. He's teaching participants everything from how to work with the analog media when sections of damaged tape need to be spliced, to how to organize the digital files. We do this in a very condensed 3.5-day training week, which brings together people from different First Nations across British Columbia. While we have tried to design a program that has as few barriers as possible to learning this work, asking people to leave homes and families for this time is very challenging. While COVID messed with our ability to deliver in-person workshops this year, it granted us an opportunity to focus on developing replicable training. Currently, we are working on a large National Research Council contract in support of Indigenous language revitalization. Our goal is to develop, with Musqueam and the Heiltsuk Cultural Education Center, a series of online teaching resources for a variety of media digitization formats, specifically for community settings. We do this because the knowledge is needed now, and we know that the tapes will degrade with time. But the only way that this program could be as successful as it has been is because we asked what kept people from accessing other community digitization grants. We confirmed, as we suspected, that it was because of access control. At the time, grants would only support digitization that enabled products that were public. This is a non-starter for most Indigenous communities in Canada who may not have trust with relationships with the digitizing grantor, and who have not had capacity to define what cultural heritage needs to be protected and what can be shared on their terms. So some concluding thoughts. Huiwa has relationships with a large network of departments, programs, and services on both campuses, as well as with Musqueam, other First Nations and Aboriginal organizations, and allies in the information professions across Canada and the world. We are fortunate to work with many Indigenous scholars, students, staff, alumni, and community members, and only a few are represented by the logos of these programs. You can help by investing in the recruitment and retention of Indigenous people in the information professions. The work of decolonization and indigenization requires us to take care of ourselves as Indigenous individuals and as a team, to continue learning our own cultures and languages for the purpose of personal and professional development. At Huihua, we also need to think about how we can enhance existing capacity to try to match the pace of growth of Indigenous initiatives at the university with our abilities to respond. Indigenization and decolonization takes time to figure out and should be done in a thoughtful and community-engaged way. While I have given you some ideas based on our work, there are steps that cannot be skipped. There are many issues that can be explored and addressed, and it is important to remember that the process is just as important to the relationship as the end results. As Musqueam elders have said, there are no shortcuts. This photo shows a boulder with a Musqueam phrase engraved on it, first in their language of Hunkaminam, then English, and it says, "Remember your teachings. Welcome to the ancestral homeland of the Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam people. We must continuously be mindful of the importance of the connection to place and people in all of the work that we do." When you think about it, Vancouver has only been around for a couple of 100 years, while Musqueam has been here since time immemorial. UBC is so new compared to First Nations establishments in this place, and there is so much that we need to humbly listen to. And with that, I thank you and welcome questions.
Sarah, that was just fascinating. Thank you so much for really thoughtful and interesting presentation. Let's start off with this question for you from one of our participants. Why is the metadata heading Aboriginal Canadians rather than Indigenous Canadians? This refers to your segment on metadata.
Thank you for that question, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about contested terminology. There are many instances of metadata changes that have been upgraded from the Library of Congress subject heading Indians of North America to Indigenous peoples. We took the step of going to Aboriginal Canadians because there are people, particularly from my own community, the Métis people, who do not claim the word Indigenous as part of our identity. It discredits or does not acknowledge the settler elements of not only our genetics, but also of our culture. And so to claim just Indigenous would do a disservice to the settler influences on our community. So we chose to go with Aboriginal, not without careful consideration. It is a legal term in Canada used to represent the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. And we're not opposed to upgrading to Indigenous at a later date. But the most important thing was to change the existing heading Indians of North America and First Nations, where that existed for a number of years, to be a little bit more inclusive.
Thank you. Sarah, I wanted to return to the part of your presentation where you talked about the university's, UBC's mission and values and goals. And you said this didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of advocacy. Do you have any insight into some of the ways that this advocacy happened?
Yeah, of course, I have come along. I've been with the university for about 9 years now, and I have come along after decades of work that really started with founding elders such as Dr. Verna Kirkness and Chief Dr. Simon Baker, Chief Kutlacha, and many others. We have Elder Larry Grant still with us as the Longhouse Elder. He's a Musqueam Elder. So having their continued presence and influence, despite the fact that some of them are no longer teaching at the university, has been a really big help because we can reach back. There's a teaching by Musqueam Elder, Dr. Vince Stogan, and it's hands forward, hands back. And the teaching asks us to reach back with our left palm to the ancestors and those who have come before us for their teachings, and then pass them forward with our right hand. So when we stand in a circle, this is how our arms, our hands are clasped. And so when I think about all of the advocacy work that went into the strategic planning, it really did take a lot of clear explanations and sometimes answering very challenging questions. I myself was asked on several occasions to explain why should the university fund digitization in communities if it's not going to form content as part of our digital collections. And so I had to really advocate for the colonial foundations that have led to the mistrust and that we needed to not look through a colonial lens when developing our programs. In order to build that trust, we need to take a different approach. And we need to trust that the content that's being digitized is going to get to where it needs to go. And that the cultural revitalization and the language revitalization that comes out of it is truly worth investing in.
Excellent. And if any others would like to type questions in the chat, please go ahead. In the meantime, I'm going to ask about a topic that I think about a lot in terms of library spaces. You have a beautiful library and it looks very welcoming. I love this idea that you have lunch with the students and others who come in, creating again this welcoming, inclusive atmosphere. Do you have any suggestions though? Most people participating today have a large library with, that's serving, many groups of students. And do you have any thoughts on how to make those spaces more welcoming and more inclusive to a broader range of students?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. I truly love advising on how spaces can be designed or added to make the atmosphere feel more welcoming. Art is a big one. When we see representations that reflect our cultures in spaces, it is an immediate welcoming feeling that we have. And also having representations of the language in spaces. There's some really great low-hanging fruit, low-cost ways of having vinyl printed. Working with museum professionals has been a really great thing for us because we've learned how they build exhibits, and you can have semi-permanent or permanent ways of having language in the space. Working, of course, with the community or communities on whose territory your institutions reside is a big part of it. And so, contracting out a specific piece of artwork to a specific artist and having an opening ceremony of whatever way that should look. For example, it may look like a pipe ceremony on the prairies, or it may look like a cedar brushing on the coast. Having some way to officially and ceremonially dedicate that space is very important. But the other really important factor is in creating a welcoming space is having a staff who, if they can't look like Indigenous people, understand the barriers or the anxieties that Indigenous peoples might have when coming to a library. Libraries are part of the system of education, which was used for many decades as a system of oppression for Indigenous peoples in the residential school system. And so we are still representing and can look like part of that system today. So making sure that the staff understand that people may have anxieties about coming to the desk and really emphasize that there should be very excellent public service given to everybody, but in particular to anybody identifying as Indigenous is very important to that welcoming atmosphere as well.
That's really a terrific answer. Thank you so much. I'm going to reflect on that. I was taking some notes as you gave your examples. Now we have one more question in the chat. And as I said, I'm also open to verbal questions. But first, I want to end the formal part of our program and thank our speakers who were really wonderful. And I thank all the participants for their attention, for their good questions, and for their very positive comments about the presentations. Our next webinar is on Tuesday, October 6th, and our speakers will discuss space and place as they relate to digital scholarship.